I've tried recording this shit twice already. Fun times. Hey, I'm Alexander Jasper J, and it's definitely been a while, but I've been wanting to make a video for a while, and I finally got a new webcam that allows me to do that, but I also might be homeless soon, so we'll see how long this comeback lasts. But I'm back for now! What I'm talking about today might seem like a little bit of a stretch, but I promise I'm not pulling any threads or muscles with this one.
No. Do I need to put on another pair of shapewear?
So, two really equally important things happened this week. I can't really say that with a straight face because clearly one of them is just a little bit more significant. One, a document leaked detailing the Supreme Court's plans to overturn Roe v. Wade, which can potentially impact access to healthcare for millions. Reproductive health care? Who that? Why is that necessary? Two, Kim Kardashian wore Marilyn Monroe's dress to the Met Gala. Now, obviously, one of these is just a little bit more pressing of an issue than the other. But what if I told you the outrage from both stems from a denial of bodily autonomy? So most people are vaguely aware of who Marilyn Monroe was. She was a blonde bombshell, an actress, a model, and she also had an affair with the sitting president, where it may or may not have led to her mysterious death, spawning a bunch of fucking conspiracies. But that's typically where common knowledge about her ends. The truth is, though, she was a whole entire person outside of all that. She was a human being, a person with a troubled past that was described by her friends and coworkers as bright and determined. She worked her entire life to be seen and understood and taken seriously. Even as an accomplished actress, she still attended acting courses in order to try to master her craft, and still throughout her entire career, she was typecast as this sweet but dumb blonde. In order to really understand who Marilyn was, you need to understand the situation she came from. Now, Marilyn Monroe was not born Marilyn Monroe, but I will refer to her as Marilyn Monroe throughout the entirety of this video because she changed her name, and that's how people fucking know her. I respect name changes over here, what can I say? When Marilyn's mother, Gladys, was only 15 years old, she married for the first time to a very abusive 24-year-old man named John Newton Baker. They had 2 kids together, but they would eventually wind up divorcing, and when they divorced, John kidnapped both children. Gladys did wind up remarrying only briefly, and when Marilyn Monroe was born, she didn't know who her father was. In fact, Marilyn would never know who her father was, but she did tend to use the last name Baker growing up. Marilyn was also completely unaware that she had a sister until she was 12 years old, and even then she wouldn't meet her sister until they were both adults. Gladys, being a single mother in the 1920s and 30s, she wasn't financially prepared to have a child and made a very difficult decision to place Marilyn into foster care. Though while Marilyn was in foster care, she did visit her frequently. That's where Marilyn spent the first 7 years of her life. It was in one foster home, relatively stable. After that 7 years, Gladys found what she thought was a stable home for both her and Marilyn. It was a nice home. They had a couple of lodgers, the Atkinsons, and they went to live together. After a few months, Gladys had a mental breakdown. She was eventually diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, and mental health care being what it was back then, it was kind of bleak. It was deemed that she was no longer able to care for Marilyn. She was committed and placed in the Metropolitan State Hospital. After that, she rarely kept in contact with her daughter, and Marilyn became a ward of the state. Throughout her childhood, Marilyn did have very little of her own, and although she was originally allowed to stay in this home that she had with her mother and the Atkinsons, with the Atkinsons caring for her, they technically weren't the ones handling her affairs. That would be her mother's friend, Grace Goddard. Unfortunately, during this time, it is thought that Marilyn was being sexually abused under the care of the Atkinsons, and she developed a stutter. Eventually, she was taken out of that situation, and at that time is when she went to live with Grace Goddard for the first time in the summer of 1935. But in September of that same year, she was placed in an orphanage. It was an esteemed orphanage. All of her peers had positive things to say about it, but Marilyn felt very abandoned there. The staff at the orphanage picked up on this, and eventually they managed to convince Grace Goddard that it would be in Marilyn's best interest if Grace were to be her legal guardian. So Marilyn went back to live with Grace Goddard and her husband, Doc, but Doc was a fucking creep and molested Marilyn. So Marilyn went back into foster care and had very little consistency at this point in her life. The one constant Marilyn did have was the escapism she felt when she went to the movies. Her foster families often wanted to kind of like get her out of the way, so they would send her to the theater to do that. But that's when she was her happiest, and she would later say that this time is what motivated her to become an actress. Marilyn did eventually end up in a somewhat stable home with Anna Lower, who was the elderly aunt of her previous guardian, Grace Goddard, the one with the creepy husband. And from 1938 to 1942, she lived there and went to school and attended Christian Science services every week. Okay. But in 1942, Anna got really sick. She was elderly, after all, and Marilyn went back to live with Grace and her creep of a husband, Doc. But Doc wound up being transferred out of state for work, and because Marilyn was a ward of the state, she was not legally allowed to go with them. At this point, Marilyn was 16. She did not want to go back into foster care, so she made a rather hasty decision to marry her first husband, James Daughtery. Daughtery? As most desperate last resort marriages go, it wasn't the worst. It was bad, like not abusive, just criminally boring. And when her husband wound up being shipped out to the Pacific, Monroe would start modeling. And eventually that got her a deal with Fox. But James didn't want her modeling. He wanted her to be a housewife. Marilyn didn't want that, so she fucking divorced him. Fuck that guy. She deserved better. Marilyn, more than anything, at this point in her life, wanted the autonomy to make her own choices and take control of her life. Something she was never able to do before. Sadly, though, a lot of the misfortune and instability that plagued her childhood would follow her through her adult life and public career. She had lifelong struggles with chronic illnesses, abusive relationships, mental illness, and just, an outright denial of basic human respect. With that history in mind, according to Ripley, when Marilyn went to Bob Mackie to have him design her a dress, she specifically requested, "I want you to design a historical dress, a dazzling dress that's one of a kind, a dress that only Marilyn Monroe could wear." And he did. He designed a dress so matched to her skin tone that it would create a nude illusion, a dress that she literally had to be sewn into, right? Like, this wasn't a dress anyone else could, it was just her dress. Ripley, of course, knew all that and loaned out Marilyn's dress to Kim Kardashian. The dress, mind you, Marilyn Monroe wore to her last public appearance before committing suicide. Kim Kardashian also could not wear that dress. It did not match her skin tone, and we all know Kim Kardashian has a substantially bigger ass than Miss Monroe, despite, the crash dieting to try to fit into it. That on its own is a problem. Don't do that. What the fuck? Now, all of that was against Marilyn's wishes, but Ripley's also decided to gift Kim Kardashian a lock of Marilyn Monroe's hair. Ripley's gifted the remains of a dead woman who committed suicide to somebody she'd never met, just because, treating her like a commodity, like a trading card, which would be bad enough if it weren't for the fact that Marilyn was treated like that throughout her entire life and expressed her displeasure with being treated like that. So, how did Ripley's get Marilyn's shit. Well, when Marilyn Monroe died, it was rather sudden, and she didn't have any immediate family, but she left about 75% of her estate to her acting coach, who, to her, was like a parent. And that's a big deal for her. Unfortunately, Marilyn didn't know enough to set up her estate in a trust, so she could still take care of her loved ones without risking the future of her estate. Since 75% of her estate outright went to Mr. Strasberg when he remarried and later died, Anna Strasberg, a woman that Marilyn never fucking met, inherited 75% of her estate, and she saw that as a fucking payday. Immediately, she started licensing and selling off portions of Marilyn's estate, including the Bob Mackie dress, and essentially all of Ripley's exhibit on Marilyn Monroe. That is how they acquired it. Anna Strasberg made millions off of this. She made fucking bang. I see it as rather exploitative, but that's just my opinion. What do I know? So no, Kim Kardashian is not the next Marilyn Monroe. She's the furthest thing from it. And believe it or not, Ripley's is the last entity that should be determining who is worthy of wearing Marilyn's dress. This whole situation is ridiculous, but unfortunately, it's not unique to Marilyn. Rich entitlement to historical artifacts is a rampant problem and has been since before Marilyn was even born. The amount of history we've lost to private collections and shit like mummy unwrapping parties in the 18th and 19th century is incomprehensible and cannot be recovered. While we now know literally unwrapping mummified human remains for your own entertainment is a bad thing, a lot of society's richest will still purchase historical artifacts, most of which coming from tombs, seemingly without even realizing the cultures that these artifacts belong to have been begging, trying desperately for decades to try to recover all of this shit and stop private trading. There's even been an international ban on the trade of artifacts trafficked after the 1970s. However, just recently, Demi Lovato attempted to purchase ancient Egyptian artifacts. Demi failed to do the research to the extent where they could not spot a very, very obvious and very, very significant issue with the certificate of provenance, which is a big deal because that's how they track what has been trafficked after the 1970s. Like, that's how these you get it. The certificate of provenance was fake, and the items wound up being completely fraudulent, but had the certificate of provenance been fake, and the items weren't fraudulent, baby, Demi just violated international trade law. That's a big deal. All this begs the question, if you can't be bothered to do the bare minimum research when it comes to purchasing these artifacts, or even hire a reputable dealer to do it for you, what makes you think you're qualified to care for them? The answer shouldn't be money, but that is often what it comes down to. Again, most of these items are found in tombs, and in my opinion, like Marilyn's dress, they shouldn't be on display in any collection, but they are. And often you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. Still, we should at least try to be respectful. After these items are removed, they still belong to the region they were found in, and they should be under the care of professionals at reputable museums who understand the significance of what they're looking at, and use that information respectfully to educate the public about their cultural history. A lot of these items are just collecting dust in private collections of people who just think it's kind of fucking cool to have a piece of history, which it is. It is cool to have a piece of history, but it's so much cooler. You know what the fuck you're looking at. They shouldn't be collecting dust in a rich dude's private collection they purchased off a black market dealer after that dude robbed a tomb. That's not respectful. The rich shouldn't have special access to historical artifacts, and I am kind of glad some people understand that it was wrong for Kim to wear that dress because it is a historic piece, but I do wish that we could also see beyond that to the deeper problem, because this is a whole iceberg. We should direct this same energy towards these unethical private collections and how they've impacted our understanding of the world around us. How much more could we really know about our history if it weren't for the greed of a few? How many more people could access these important finds if they were kept well preserved by professionals in public collections and on display at reputable museums? These are questions I can't really answer.